They said property lines were just fences, just paint on a surveyor's map. But I learned the hard way, when someone decides your land belongs to them, it isn't a line on paper anymore. It's a war. And in my case, that war began with the creak of a wooden gate, the faint smell of smoke drifting where it didn't belong, and the sound of laughter on land my grandfather fought his whole life to protect. You see, this story doesn't start with a party. It starts long before that with a man who built his life on soil and sweat and a promise I made him on his deathbed. My grandfather always told me, land is memory, don't let anyone take it from you. At the time, I thought he meant neighbors, developers, the slow creep of cities that eat farmland piece by piece. I didn't realize that one day, my fight would be with the very people living just over the fence. A homeowners association that believed rules gave them the right to erase my family's history. I was still young when I first realized how heavy land ownership can feel. Most of my friends chased jobs in the city, but me, I kept coming back to the farm. I'd spend summer evenings walking past the crumbling dairy barn, running my hands along weathered wood that smelled of hay and rain. My grandfather would sit on the porch with his black coffee, watching me like he was making sure I understood. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, it stuck. "You'll understand one day," he'd say, "why I never sold an acre." And I did understand, because every time I watched a developer's bulldozer push closer to our property line, I saw his jaw tighten. I saw the same pain in his eyes he once confessed to me about watching his own father's land vanish acre by acre. "It's like losing family," he'd said, and I promised him I wouldn't let it happen again. That promise became my anchor. When he passed, the farm came to me. Out of all the cousins, the children, the aunts and uncles, he left it to me alone. Some called it favoritism, but I knew why. I was the only one who cared about more than money. While others saw old barns and weeds, I saw history, I saw him. And not everyone liked that, especially one woman. Her name was Karen. At least that's what I'll call her here. She wasn't just a neighbor, she was the self-appointed queen of the HOA that bordered my property. The kind of woman who treated every rule like scripture, every deviation like a personal insult. She had an iron smile that never reached her eyes, and the kind of presence that made entire families fall silent when she stepped onto their porch to deliver a reminder. My grandfather hated her guts. I still remember one afternoon, I must have been 15, when she marched up our driveway with a clipboard in hand, demanding to know why he wouldn't sell his unused back lot. He had leaned on his cane, pointed at the no trespassing sign on the fence line, and said, "Because it's not yours." Then he turned his back on her and walked inside. I'd never seen anyone sputter with rage quite like that woman. But Karen wasn't the type to give up. She circled him like a vulture, always showing up with offers, always pretending she was doing him a favor by suggesting ways he could retire in peace. And when he refused, she'd pivot into threats, complaints about noise, about livestock, about weeds too close to her pristine subdivision. When he died, I thought maybe she'd finally leave us alone. I was wrong. Within days of the funeral, she was at the door again. Only this time, she wasn't asking politely. She was demanding. "We'll make you a generous offer," she told me, her lipstick too bright against the morning light. "It's wasted land otherwise. Don't let your grandfather's stubbornness ruin your future." I'll never forget the way she looked when I told her no. Like I was a child refusing medicine, too foolish to understand what was good for me. That was the first time I realized Karen didn't see me as a neighbor. She saw me as an obstacle. And if you know anything about people like her, you know what obstacles invite: pressure. It started small. I'd catch her wandering the edge of my property, pretending to check on fence conditions. Once, I came home from work and found her taking pictures of my barn, claiming she was documenting code violations. Another time, one of her sons was mowing dangerously close to my pasture, the smell of fresh-cut grass mixing with the sharp bite of gasoline. And when I asked him why, he shrugged and said his mom told him the fence line was in dispute. It was exhausting, but I brushed it off, telling myself she'd eventually get bored. After all, the HOA was a job in itself. She had plenty of people to terrorize inside her little kingdom. Except Karen wasn't bored, she was patient. Looking back, I should have realized what she was doing, studying me, learning my schedule. I had a hybrid job back then, splitting my time between the farm and a cramped apartment in the city so I could clock in at the office during the week. I thought it gave me balance, but to her, it gave her opportunity. Because the less I was home, the more she could treat my land like it was hers. The first time I suspected something, it was just a feeling. I came back late one Friday, tires crunching on gravel, and noticed tire marks in the dirt that weren't mine. My gate, that old, heavy gate that always groaned when I opened it, was ajar as if someone hadn't bothered to close it properly. Inside, a beer can glinted in the grass near the chicken coop. It was the kind of detail most people would miss. But I knew this wasn't random. Someone had been here. I told myself it was kids, teenagers cutting across the property. I even let myself believe it for a while, but then I found out the truth. It was past midnight when my phone buzzed. Motion sensors. My grandfather had taught me to keep cameras on the animals, and that night I was grateful for it. Half asleep, I pulled up the feed expecting to see a raccoon, maybe a stray dog, but instead I heard it. Music, bass-heavy, distant but steady, vibrating through the speakers like a pulse. Laughter, shouts, and then faintly a voice over a microphone. My heart stopped. I sat there in the dark, staring at my phone, every muscle tight. My land wasn't just trespassed, it was occupied. And in that moment, I remembered my grandfather's words, "Don't let anyone take it from you." I grabbed my keys. The city apartment walls felt too small, the silence too loud. 30 minutes later, I was on the highway, headlights carving through empty night. My palms were sweaty on the steering wheel, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. At any point, I could have convinced myself to turn around, to let it slide, to wait until morning. But I didn't, because something deeper than anger was moving me. It was shame. Shame that my grandfather had trusted me. And here I was, letting the one woman he despised most claim victory the moment he was gone. The farmhouse came into view just after 2 a.m. I cut the engine a quarter mile away, rolling quiet, gravel snapping under the tires. Even from there, I could see the glow, red and orange against the night sky, the kind of glow no farm should have at that hour. Smoke, music, silhouettes dancing where cows should have been grazing. I parked, stepped out, and felt the cool night air hit my face. The smell of barbecue drifted toward me, thick with grease and charcoal mixed with something sharper, the sulfur bite of fireworks. And beneath it all, the sour sting of spilled beer soaking into dirt that once grew corn. My boots crunched softly as I walked up the driveway. Every sound felt amplified. The gate creaked under my hand, the metal cold, the hinges squealing like they hadn't been oiled in years. I paused there, gripping the wood, listening. The laughter was louder now, mixed with music that made the windows of my grandfather's barn tremble. And that's when I saw her. Karen. Red dress, glass in hand. Standing on my porch like she owned it, barking orders at teenagers dragging in speakers, at neighbors who looked too nervous to leave. She threw her head back and laughed, the sound sharp and cutting, carried over the field like a dare. I froze. For a moment, all I could do was watch. The same woman who once begged for a corner of this land was now hosting a midnight party on it. And the worst part? Everyone around her acted like it was normal, like this was hers to give. I wanted to storm forward, to scream, to call the cops right then, but something in me held back, because I realized in that instant this wasn't just about trespassing. This was a test, a challenge. A line drawn not on a map, but in firelight and music. And if I lost this moment, if I walked away, she'd never stop. I tightened my grip on the gate, took a breath, and stepped into the chaos. The moment I stepped past that gate, I knew there was no turning back. It was like crossing into another world. My land, the place I had walked barefoot as a kid, where my grandfather had taught me how to mend fences and milk cows, had been transformed into a carnival. Smoke hung low in the air, thick and greasy from overcooked meat. A cheap DJ setup blasted music so loud the ground trembled, the bass rattling through my chest. Bright flashes lit up the night sky, fireworks, illegal and reckless, showering sparks dangerously close to the barn roof. For a second, I just stood there in the shadows, watching. People I didn't even know lounged in lawn chairs dragged across my grass, red plastic cups in their hands. Teenagers huddled by the chicken coop, laughing too loud, eyes glassy from whatever they'd been drinking. A group of younger kids chased each other through the field, their sneakers tearing up the soil where I'd planted feed corn only weeks earlier. And in the center of it all, like some kind of queen bee in her hive, was Karen. She was perched on my porch steps, one hand on her hip, the other clutching a wine glass. The porch light above her flickered, and for a second it framed her in this strange, eerie glow. She was shouting over the music, giving orders, "Move the cooler over here. Don't let the fire die down," like she was hosting a festival, not trespassing on a man's inheritance. Something hot surged up in my chest. Anger, yes, but also something heavier, betrayal, because this wasn't just about her. My neighbors were here too, people who knew this wasn't her land, people who had watched my grandfather grow old fighting to keep it. And yet they sat there, eating burgers off my grill, drinking under my trees. Not one of them had called me. Not one of them had lifted a finger to stop her. I started walking. My boots crunched against the gravel and a couple of heads turned. Conversation stuttered mid-sentence. One man's laugh cut off abruptly as he realized who he was looking at. I could feel the ripple move through the crowd, recognition, guilt, fear. And then, like water parting around a rock, people began to step aside. The music kept pounding, but it felt distant now. My heartbeat was louder. Each step carried me closer until I was standing at the base of my own porch, looking up at the woman who had tormented my grandfather until his last days. "Karen," I said, my voice flat, steady. She glanced down, annoyed at first, like I was some party crasher who'd wandered in uninvited. But then recognition dawned. Her painted lips curled into a smile, not of welcome, but of mockery. "Well, well," she said, lifting her glass in a mock toast. "Look who finally decided to show up. Thought you were too busy with your city life to care about this old place." My fists clenched. I forced myself to keep my voice calm. "This isn't your place. End it now." For a moment, silence hung heavy between us. Then she laughed, sharp, shrill, cutting through the night. A few nervous chuckles followed from the crowd, but no one else dared speak. "End it," she repeated, stepping down one porch step so we were eye level. "Sweetheart, this party is for the community, for people who actually use the land instead of letting it rot." She leaned closer, her perfume cloying, sweet and heavy. "You're wasting it. Everyone knows it." Her words hit like poison, and maybe that was the point, to rattle me, to make me lash out. But I didn't. I just stared at her, breathing slow, reminding myself of my grandfather's face, of his calm, stubborn silence when she'd tried this with him. "This ends tonight," I said again, each word like gravel in my throat. "You and everyone else off my land now." Karen's smile faltered. For a second, just a flicker, I saw the mask slip. But then she threw her head back and laughed again, louder this time. She spat at my boots, the wine in her glass sloshing dangerously close to spilling. "You don't get it, do you?" she sneered. "This land is HOA land, always has been. You think just because your grandfather clung to it like some relic that it makes you special. No, this is our community. We have a right to it. I have a right to it." I felt the crowd shift uneasily. Some people looked down, ashamed. Others sipped their drinks harder, pretending not to hear, but no one defended her. My pulse roared in my ears. I wanted to yell, to drag her off the porch by her arm, to set fire to her precious clipboard and watch her empire burn. But I didn't. I did something worse. I smiled. "Okay," I said quietly. Then I turned my back on her and started walking toward the barn. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Karen blinked, startled by how quickly I'd given up. She called after me, her voice sharp with mockery. "That's it. You're just walking away? Thought you were going to play cowboy hero." But she didn't see the phone in my hand. She didn't see the record button already running. She didn't hear the faint click when I dialed the non-emergency police line the second I stepped through the gate. As I walked, I lifted the camera casually, panning across the scene. The DJ pumping music loud enough to shake windows half a mile away. The fireworks box sitting open, spent shells littering the grass. Red cups spilling beer down my steps. And yes, Karen, standing tall on my porch, declaring to dozens of witnesses that my land was HOA property. Every word recorded, every face captured. By the time I reached the barn, I could see the faint glow of headlights cresting the hill. Blue and red flashes painted the night sky, mixing with the orange haze of the bonfire. I paused, leaning against the weathered wood, my heart pounding with a strange mix of triumph and grief. This wasn't how I wanted to defend my grandfather's legacy. I wanted peace, respect, a simple life. But sometimes the only way to honor the past is to fight for it in the present. Behind me, Karen was still laughing, still shouting, still oblivious. But she wouldn't be for long. Because in less than a minute, the flashing lights would be at the gate. And the woman who thought she owned everything was about to realize she owned nothing. The blue lights finally cut through the smoke. I'll never forget that moment. The way the sirens splashed across the trees, turning every branch into a flickering silhouette. The music faltered for the first time all night. The DJ, startled, fumbled with the controls. A few kids scattered toward the back fence, beer cans clattering against the dirt as they bolted into the dark. Others froze like deer in headlights, cups halfway to their mouths. The party wasn't over yet, but the illusion of control was. Two cruisers rolled up the gravel drive, tires grinding, doors opening with heavy thuds. The sound of radios crackled in the air. And then came the footsteps, boots on gravel, slow, deliberate, authority in every step. Karen's face went pale. I was standing by the barn, leaning against the wood like I'd been waiting all night for this. In a way, I had. My phone was still warm in my hand, the video paused but ready. My pulse slowed. I didn't need to shout anymore. I didn't need to beg. Now it was her turn to explain. "Evening," one officer said, scanning the scene with sharp, tired eyes. He couldn't have been more than 40, but his expression was the kind you see on men who have dealt with too much nonsense for one lifetime. His partner trailed behind, one hand resting lightly on her duty belt, her flashlight beam slicing through the smoky air. Karen hurried forward, heels clacking against the porch steps. Her laugh was brittle, forced, as she spread her arms wide like she was welcoming guests instead of law enforcement. "Officers," she said, too loud, too cheerful. "I'm so glad you're here. We've been trying to, well, you know how it is with young people these days." She gestured vaguely at the teens wobbling near the bonfire, their red cups still in hand. Things got a little out of hand. Her words hung awkwardly in the air. No one echoed them. The first officer's gaze swept across the field, landing on the DJ, the fireworks shells, the cases of beer stacked like pyramids near the barn. His jaw tightened. "You're saying this is your event?" Karen didn't hesitate. She nodded quickly, her earrings catching the red-blue flash of the lights. Yes, it's a community gathering. I'm the president of the HOA." She tapped her chest like that meant something here. "I was just about to shut it down when you arrived." It was almost impressive the way she lied. Almost. Because the officer wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at me. I pushed off the barn wall and walked forward, slow and steady, the weight of every eye following me. The gravel crunched beneath my boots. I stopped just short of the porch, close enough for Karen to flinch, but not close enough for her to hide behind me. "Not quite," I said. Karen's head snapped toward me, her smile dropped. "Excuse me." "This isn't your event," I said. "It isn't your land, it's mine." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Yours." "Yes, sir." I pulled my wallet from my back pocket, flipping it open to the property card tucked behind my license. The county seal glinted under the cruiser lights. "Inherited it from my grandfather, never sold a piece of it, never joined their HOA, and yet—" I swept my arm across the chaos, the DJ, the smoke, the piles of trash. "This is what I came home to tonight." Karen sputtered, stepping in front of me, her perfume sharp in the night air. "Don't listen to him," she snapped, her voice rising. "He doesn't understand how things work. This property has always been part of the community. He just refuses to acknowledge it." The officer didn't respond right away. He looked between us, then tilted his head slightly. "Do you have proof of ownership?" I held up my phone. The screen glowed, illuminating my hand. "Proof of ownership, proof of trespassing, proof of underage drinking, proof of fireworks during a county ban. Take your pick." I tapped the screen and the video began to play. Karen's voice echoed in the smoky night, recorded clear as day, declaring, "This land is HOA land, always has been. We have a right to it." The officer's brow furrowed. He turned his flashlight on Karen. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She stammered, reaching for her wine glass like it could shield her. That was taken out of context, she said finally, her laugh high-pitched and nervous. I was joking. You know, everyone exaggerates at parties. But no one was laughing. Behind us, the crowd began to thin. Neighbors shuffled awkwardly, pretending to be invisible as they slipped toward the road. A few teens ducked behind the barn, hopping not to be noticed. The DJ yanked a cable from his board, and the music died with a screech, leaving only the crackle of the bonfire and the hum of the cruiser engines. Corinne's smile faltered further. Her son appeared from the shadows, his face pale, his arms crossed defensively. He looked like he wanted to vanish. The officer glanced at him. How old are you? 17, the boy muttered. And you've been drinking tonight. Silence, then a reluctant nod. Corinne snapped toward him. Don't answer that, she hissed. You don't have to say anything. The female officer stepped forward now, her voice firm. Ma'am, step aside. She directed her flashlight at the half-empty bottle of vodka lying in the grass, then at the small group of kids slumped against the chicken coop, glassy-eyed and swaying. We'll be speaking to all of them. Corinne's face twisted, a mask of desperation and rage. This is harassment, she shrieked. You don't understand. I'm the HOA president. I was trying to control this party, not host it. Her words bounced uselessly against the night air. Nobody believed her, not anymore. I stood there quietly, letting it unfold, my arms crossed, my phone still recording. For once, I didn't need to fight. The truth was speaking for itself. The first officer turned back to me. His expression softened slightly. Sir, thank you for calling this in. We'll need a formal statement and copies of those recordings. Of course, I said, my voice steady. Corinne whirled on me, her face blotchy under the flashing lights. You think you've won, don't you? She spat, her voice trembling. You think this changes anything? You're wasting this land. I'll make sure everyone knows it. You're nothing but a stubborn, selfish. Ma'am, the officer cut in sharply. That's enough. She froze, silenced not by me, but by authority she couldn't manipulate. And in that silence I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not yet, but clarity. For years she'd chipped away at my peace, convinced she had power over me. But tonight, under the blue glow of those sirens, the balance had finally tilted. The officers began moving through the crowd, questioning kids, taking names, confiscating bottles. A few of the older neighbors muttered apologies as they slipped past me, their shoes crunching on the gravel, their eyes avoiding mine. Corinne stood stiff on the porch, her hands trembling as she clutched her glass, now empty. Her son leaned against the railing, head down, shame written across his face. For the first time, she looked small. I gave my statement calmly, methodically. Dates, times, my work schedule, the security camera notifications that pulled me from bed, the drive through the night, every detail laid out like a ledger. And when the officer asked if I wanted to press charges, I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew this wasn't over. No, I said finally, not yet. The officer nodded, scribbling in his notebook. Understood, but she'll be facing charges for the alcohol, the fireworks, and the trespassing regardless. You've given us more than enough. Corinne's face went white. I met her eyes one last time. This ends tonight, I said quietly. But even as the words left my lips, I knew the truth. For her, it was only beginning. The silence after the sirens was louder than the music had ever been. When the cruisers finally pulled away, the fields looked like a battlefield. Trash scattered across the grass, beer bottles glinting in the dirt, the bonfire smoldering down to embers. The air still smelled of smoke and grease, but now it carried something else, shame. The kind that lingers after a mask has been torn off. I stood there for a long while, listening to the crickets pick up their song again, letting the cool night air wash the heat from my skin. My land had never felt so violated. Every corner seemed tainted, the trampled rows, the porch steps sticky with spilled liquor, the barn wall scorched from a stray firework. It wasn't just trespassing. It was desecration. But the strangest part, Corinne didn't leave with the police. She stayed rooted to that porch like it was her throne, her jaw tight, her eyes glassy with fury. Even when her son slipped away into the dark, embarrassed and silent, she stood there. I didn't speak to her again. I didn't need to, she knew what was coming. By dawn, the party was nothing more than ash and litter. I walked the property slowly, my boots sinking into damp soil, each step crunching over broken glass. The chickens clucked nervously in their coop, unsettled by the night's chaos. I gathered cans into black bags, snapped photos of the scorch marks, the cigarette burns, the shattered bottles, evidence just in case. But more than that, proof for myself, proof that I hadn't imagined it. That my grandfather's land had truly been turned into something unrecognizable for one reckless night. And still, the world outside my fence went on. By Monday, the subdivision looked the same as it always did. Lawns neatly trimmed, cars polished in driveways, porch lights glowing in the evening. But something was different. Conversations hushed when I walked past. Curtains twitched. Neighbors who had once nodded politely now avoided my eyes. It wasn't me they feared. It was her. Karen strutted through those streets like nothing had happened. She waved at families with that same practiced smile, called HOA meetings like clockwork, handed out violation notices for grass a half-inch too long. She carried herself like the same queen of the cul-de-sac. But I could see it, the cracks. People didn't linger near her anymore. Some crossed the street when they saw her coming. Others offered only tight, polite nods before hurrying away. And her son, I noticed he stopped mowing lawns for her, stopped following 2 steps behind with that forced loyalty. He walked with his head down, earbuds in, as if trying to disappear. It was subtle, but it was there. Her empire was rotting from the inside. I kept quiet. I went back to my work, tending the dairy, fixing fences, restoring what had been damaged. But I was listening, and the whispers reached me. They said the police had filed multiple reports. Noise violations, trespassing, distribution of alcohol to minors. They said several parents in the HOA had been furious when they found out their kids had been there, some even picked up by officers that night. They said Karen had been seen at the county office, red-faced and shouting at a clerk who refused to make the paperwork disappear. I didn't know how much of it was true at first. Rumors have a way of growing legs. But then, one evening, as I was patching the gate hinge, a neighbor I barely knew wandered up the drive. He was a quiet man, the kind who always kept his yard tidy but never said more than a few words at the mailbox. That night, though, he lingered, his hands in his pockets, his eyes flicking nervously toward the subdivision. "Hell of a mess the other night," he muttered. I just nodded, wiping the sweat from my forehead. "You did the right thing," he added after a pause. His voice was low, like he was afraid someone might overhear. "A lot of us, well, we don't say much, but we saw it, we know." Before I could reply, he tipped his head, muttered, "Take care," and walked back toward the road. That was all, but it was enough. I realized then that Karen's power wasn't real. It was smoke and mirrors built on fear and silence. People hadn't followed her because they respected her. They followed because they were afraid of the fines, the humiliation, the retaliation. But once the mask slipped, once they saw her screaming under the blue flash of police lights, fear turned into something else. Disgust. Still, Karen refused to see it. At the next HOA meeting, she marched to the podium, hair immaculate, clipboard in hand. She barked orders, lectured families about Christmas decorations put up too early, demanded payment for lawn services nobody had requested. But this time the room wasn't nodding along. Parents crossed their arms, eyes cold. A couple even stood up mid-meeting and walked out, shaking their heads. Karen doubled down. She raised her voice, slammed her hand against the table, threatened fines and lawsuits. But the more she shouted, the emptier the room grew. I wasn't there myself. I didn't need to be. The whispers told me everything. And then came the moment she couldn't ignore. Word spread fast, too fast for her to contain. A handful of the teens from that night had been called into the sheriff's office with their parents. Statements were given, photos reviewed. One boy, barely 16, admitted he hadn't brought the alcohol himself. He hadn't needed to. Karen had handed it to him. The charge was clear, furnishing alcohol to minors, a crime that couldn't be waved away with HOA bylaws or sharp smiles. When I heard, I didn't feel joy. Not exactly. I felt something heavier. Relief, maybe, vindication, the weight of years of her harassment lifting inch by inch. But also sadness not for her but for her son, for the neighbors who had let fear keep them silent, for the land itself, scarred by one night of arrogance. I stood at the fence line that evening, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and red, and I thought about my grandfather. About his stubborn refusal to sell, about the way he'd said land was memory. He was right. This place carried him still in every stone and fence post, in every tree root twisting deep into the soil. And maybe that's why Karen could never truly touch it, because she didn't understand. She saw land as power, he saw it as life. And me, I had to choose which of those visions to carry forward. I tightened the latch on the gate, the metal cool under my palm, and made myself a promise. This wasn't over. She would fight, deny, scream until her last breath, but I wasn't my grandfather anymore. I wasn't just the kid watching from the porch. I was the owner now, and I would defend this land no matter what it took. It was the envelope that told me everything had changed. Thick paper, county seal pressed into the corner, delivered by a deputy who didn't even look up from his clipboard when he handed it over. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. Still, when I slit the top and pulled the folded sheets free, the words hit like a hammer. Notice of investigation. Karen wasn't just the subject of neighborhood gossip anymore. She was under official scrutiny, charges pending, distribution of alcohol to minors, noise violations, trespassing. Each line was written in black ink, impersonal, precise. There was nothing theatrical about it. No raised voices, no threats of fines on pastel letterhead, just the law, heavy and undeniable. I stood at the kitchen table, the paper trembling slightly in my hands, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not victory, not yet, but the beginning of it. Karen, of course, pretended nothing had changed. She was out in the subdivision the next morning, heels clicking across the asphalt, clipboard tucked under her arm. She handed out violation slips for weeds in driveways, called out to joggers about proper leash lengths, and barked at kids riding bikes without helmets. Her voice carried through the cul-de-sac, loud and grating, as if volume alone could drown out the truth. But people weren't listening anymore. I saw it in their eyes when I passed through the neighborhood that evening. Parents standing stiff on porches, arms crossed, staring her down instead of nodding along. Teens rolling their eyes openly, no longer afraid of being reported for disrespect. One mother snatched a violation slip from Karen's hand, crumpled it in her fist, and tossed it into the trash before walking back inside without a word. Karen's smile flickered that day, just for a second, a hairline crack in the porcelain mask she wore so tightly. And then came the HOA meeting. Neighbors crammed into the community hall, folding chairs squeaking against linoleum. The air was heavy with tension, thicker than the August heat outside. Karen stood at the front, her usual place, clipboard resting like a scepter on the table. She cleared her throat, smiled too wide, and launched into her speech. "Now, before we get into old business," she began, her tone sugary sweet, "I want to address some unfortunate rumors circulating about recent events." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People shifted in their seats, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "These claims," she continued, her voice rising, "about me providing alcohol, about trespassing, about endangering minors, they are outrageous. They are being blown out of proportion by someone who doesn't understand how our community works." Her gaze flicked to me at the back of the room. The air seemed to tighten, every head turning toward me for just a second before snapping back to her. I didn't move, didn't blink, just let her words hang there. "I was supervising," she insisted. "I was protecting these kids, making sure things didn't get out of hand. Anyone who says otherwise is twisting the truth." It was almost convincing, almost. Until a father in the third row stood up. His voice cut through the room like a blade. "My son was one of those kids," he said flatly, and he told me exactly who handed him the bottle. The room went still. Karen's mouth opened, closed, her face flushed red, then white. She laughed nervously, waving a hand as if to swat the words away. "Children exaggerate," she said, her voice trembling. "They misremember. You know how teenagers are." Another voice rose, a mother this time, arms crossed, eyes blazing. "Funny, my daughter said the same thing, that you brought out the cooler yourself." Karen's hands trembled against the edge of the table, papers shifted. The mask was slipping faster now. And then her own son, stood up from the side of the room. His voice cracked, quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. "It's true," he said. "She gave it to us." The silence that followed was suffocating. Karen whipped toward him, her face twisted in disbelief. "How dare you?" But he didn't sit back down. He didn't take it back. He just stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped, as if the weight of years had finally crushed him into honesty. The room erupted. Murmurs, gasps, voices rising over one another. Some people shouted for her resignation. Others called for police. The board members at the front shifted uncomfortably, exchanging looks, their pens scratching nervously across papers. And for the first time in years, Karen wasn't in control. I didn't stay until the end. I didn't need to. As I stepped out into the warm night, the sound of her shouting echoed behind me, frantic, desperate, hollow. The legal process moved slower than the whispers, but it moved. Summons were issued. Court dates set. The sheriff's office called me back for additional statements, reviewing the videos I'd taken, matching timestamps with county noise ordinances. The evidence stacked higher and higher, until even Karen's loudest denials sounded paper-thin. The day she finally appeared in court, I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to stay away, to let the law do its work without me watching her twist under its weight. But another part of me, the part that remembered my grandfather's weary eyes, the part that had stood in the dark watching strangers dance on our land, knew I had to. The courthouse smelled of dust and old wood, the kind of place where time seems to move slower. Karen swept in wearing her brightest red suit, her hair stiff with spray, her heels clicking defiantly against the tile. She carried herself like she was attending a gala, not a hearing. But the room didn't bend around her anymore. The judge's eyes were flat, the prosecutor's tone sharp, the murmurs from the gallery cold. Parents testified. Teens stumbled through their statements, embarrassed but firm. And then came the video. Her voice echoing from my phone, declaring my land HOA property. Her laughter over the music, her orders shouted from my porch. The crowd of kids clutching drinks, fireworks exploding against the barn roof. She tried to object, tried to interrupt, to explain, to spin it as taken out of context. But the judge silenced her with a single raised hand. When the gavel finally struck, the sound was final. Fines, community service, charges entered into the record. It wasn't prison, it wasn't ruin. Not yet, but it was enough. Enough to strip away the illusion she'd worn for so long, enough to make her name synonymous with disgrace in the very community she once ruled. I walked out of that courthouse into the late afternoon sun, the air heavy but clean. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe. Justice isn't always about revenge. Sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's the sound of a gavel, the sight of a mask shattering in public. Sometimes it's simply knowing that truth, slow, relentless truth, always outlasts the lies. I thought about my grandfather that evening as I walked the fence line, the sun dipping low over the hills. He never lived to see her brought low, but maybe that was better. He carried enough weight in his life. Me, I'd carried it too, but now I was starting to let it go. You'd think a courtroom humiliation would be enough to silence someone like Karen. But if you know people like her, you know the truth. When their empire crumbles, they don't walk away quietly. They claw, they scratch, they double down. The week after her sentencing, she was back in the subdivision, clipboard in hand, strutting from house to house like nothing had changed. Her voice carried across manicured lawns as she pointed out violations. A flower bed too close to the sidewalk, a garden hose left in plain view, a child's bicycle leaning against a porch. She handed out slips like candy, her lipstick smile stretched thin but still painted on. Only this time, nobody moved. I watched from my truck as she marched up to one neighbor's porch, waving a violation slip for improperly trimmed hedges. The homeowner, a quiet man who'd never dared speak up before, stood there with his arms crossed. He didn't take the paper, didn't argue, just said in a voice calm but unshakable, "You don't get to tell me anything anymore." Karen sputtered, waving the slip in his face. "I am the HOA president." But the man just shut his door. I saw it again 2 houses down, and again the next street over. People weren't defying her loudly. They were simply refusing to play along. And that silence, that heavy, immovable silence, was more powerful than any shouting could have been. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Folding chairs filled the community hall, the air hot with restless energy. Karen stood at the front, red suit pressed sharp, her papers stacked high. She launched into her speech as though nothing had changed. "Good evening," she said brightly, her voice echoing off the walls. "We'll begin tonight with a reminder that Christmas decorations must be approved in advance. Anyone who puts lights up before the 1st of December will face fines. Additionally—" A voice cut her off. "No." It came from the middle row, a mother, hair pulled back, hands clenched around the strap of her purse. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Karen blinked, thrown off for a moment. "Excuse me." "No," the woman repeated, firmer this time. "You don't get to fine us anymore. You don't get to tell us when to hang our lights." Murmurs rippled through the room. Heads nodded. Someone in the back clapped once sharply, then stopped, as though testing the waters. Karen slammed her hand on the table. "I am still president of this HOA. My authority is recognized by—" Another voice rose, a man this time, standing tall near the back. "Your authority ended the night the cops showed up on his land." He jerked a thumb in my direction. The room followed his gesture, dozens of eyes turning toward me. I stayed seated, arms crossed, saying nothing. I didn't need to. The weight wasn't on me anymore, it was on her. The board members at the front shifted uncomfortably. One cleared her throat, her pen tapping nervously against her notepad. Finally, she spoke. "Karen, given recent events, the board has discussed this matter. We believe it's in the best interest of the community that you step down." The words hit like a hammer. Karen's face went white, then red. "Step down," she spat. "After everything I've done for this neighborhood, the order I've maintained, the value I've protected, you would throw it all away because of lies spread by him." Her finger jabbed the air in my direction, trembling with rage. But the board member didn't flinch. "This isn't about him. This is about you. The charges, the evidence, the reputation of this community. You've made us a laughingstock." The room erupted. Voices overlapping, some shouting for her removal, others demanding refunds for unfair fines, others just venting years of pent-up frustration. The sound was deafening, a wave crashing over Karen's protests. She tried to shout over them, tried to regain control, but her voice was swallowed whole. For the first time in years, nobody was listening. And then came the vote. Simple, swift, hands raised one by one, a sea of fingers rising against her. Outnumbered, outvoted, out. The board announced her removal with little ceremony. No speeches, no applause, just a line read into the record. Effective immediately, Karen is relieved of her duties as HOA president. Karen stood frozen, her papers clutched in her fists, her eyes wild. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Then slowly she gathered her clipboard, stuffed her papers into her bag, and stormed out, heels clicking hard against the tile. The door slammed behind her, rattling in its frame. The room exhaled all at once. It wasn't triumph, not exactly. It was relief. Like a storm had finally passed, leaving wreckage behind but clearing the air. I stayed in my seat as neighbors began to talk among themselves, louder now, freer. Some laughed nervously, others vented, some just shook their heads. And I realized something in that moment. Karen had never truly held power, not really. She'd only held fear, and fear only lasts as long as people allow it. Once silence is broken, once truth is spoken aloud, fear collapses under its own weight. That night I walked back across my land, the sky clear above me, stars sharp against the darkness. The gate creaked as I closed it behind me, the familiar sound grounding me. For the first time in years, I felt the farm breathe again. Not because Karen was gone, not because fines would stop landing in mailboxes, but because people had finally stood up. And maybe that was the lesson my grandfather wanted me to learn. Land isn't just soil and fences. It's people. It's community. And dignity doesn't always come from fighting louder. Sometimes it comes from standing firm until others find their voices, too. Karen had lost hers, and the silence she left behind spoke louder than any of her threats ever had. She didn't vanish after the vote. People like Karen never do. The night after she was stripped of her title, she was out again, stalking the sidewalks with stacks of flyers in her hands. Her heels clicked against the pavement, the sound sharp in the still air, as she stuffed papers into mailboxes and slapped them onto front doors. Defamation, the headlines screamed in bold letters. False accusations, community betrayal. She named me outright, called me a liar, a troublemaker, accused me of conspiring to destroy the HOA. The papers were littered with exclamation marks and legal jargon cut from half-understood statutes. She even stapled some to the community bulletin board, the corners flapping in the wind like tattered flags of a fallen kingdom. But nobody saluted them. By morning, most of the flyers were gone, tossed in trash cans, crumpled on driveways left to soak in sprinklers. A few kids taped them to their bikes as jokes, riding in circles with defamation, fluttering like banners behind them. Karen saw, of course, and it only made her angrier. She started packing the neighborhood like a guard dog, pointing at houses, shouting at neighbors who ignored her. One afternoon, I caught sight of her standing at the end of my driveway, clipboard clutched tight, her face red with fury. "You," she shouted, her voice carrying across the gravel. "You think you've ruined me. You think you can just waltz back into this community and tear down everything I built." I leaned against the fence post, calm, arms crossed. I didn't answer. Not because I couldn't, but because she didn't deserve my words anymore. She ranted on, spittle flying, fists trembling. "This isn't over. I'll sue you. I'll take this to the county. I'll make sure you regret every second you've lived here." Her words cracked like brittle wood, empty threats. Neighbors stood at windows, watching silently, some shaking their heads, others filming quietly with their phones. Karen must have seen them, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. That night, she called the sheriff's office, reporting harassment on my part. They showed up at my gate, apologetic but professional. "We're required to check," one deputy said. "She's made complaints before." I handed him the footage from my security cameras. Karen, packing outside my fence, shouting, waving her clipboard like a sword. The deputy sighed, pinched the bridge of his nose, and shook his head. "Figures," he muttered, "we'll note it." The report went nowhere, just like the next one, and the one after that. But Karen didn't stop. She stormed into county offices demanding they redraw property lines. She filed complaint letters against half a dozen neighbors, claiming they were in league with me. She even staged confrontations in the grocery store parking lot, cornering families and screaming about betrayal until security escorted her out. The more she fought, the more alone she became. Neighbors who once whispered now spoke openly. Parents told their kids not to go near her house. The HOA board, trying to restore some sense of order, issued a formal notice banning her from community property after multiple outbursts at the pool and clubhouse. And then came the moment I'll never forget. One evening, just as the sky turned gold with sunset, I saw her son standing at the bus stop with a single duffel bag. His shoulders sagged under the weight of it, his face pale but determined. Karen was on the porch behind him, shouting, pleading, waving her arms like she could pull him back by sheer force of will. But he didn't turn around. A neighbor's truck pulled up, the passenger door opened, and he climbed in without a word. The engine started, gravel crunched, and they drove away. Karen's voice cracked, echoing through the street. "You can't leave me, you're all I have left." Her words hung there, sharp and desperate, before fading into the cicadas' song. She stood on that porch long after the truck disappeared, her figure small against the fading light. No clipboard now, no power, just a woman who'd burned every bridge she ever built. I watched from my fence, the crickets chirping in the fields around me, and I felt not triumph, not anger, not even relief. Just pity, because I understood, finally, what Karen had never been able to. Power doesn't come from fear. Authority doesn't come from papers or titles. Respect isn't earned through threats or fines. It comes from trust, from dignity, from the quiet strength of standing firm without needing to shout. Karen had none of it, and without it she had nothing. The subdivision moved on without her. Meetings grew calmer, neighbors greeted one another more warmly. Kids played in driveways without parents glancing nervously at clipboards. Even the air felt lighter, freer. But Karen remained, lurking, watching, a shadow packing her porch, staring out at land she still believed should be hers. And I knew she wasn't finished yet. It ended the way storms always do, not with a sudden crash but with silence. For weeks after her son left, Karen lingered like a ghost on her porch. She paced in the evenings, muttering into her phone, drafting letters no one read. She tacked notices to the community board, warning of illegal gatherings and unauthorized property changes. She left voicemails for county offices, for attorneys, for anyone who would listen. But nobody did. Neighbors walked past her house without looking. Kids biked by in giggling groups, their wheels rattling over the cracks in the pavement. Lawns grew wild with late summer clover, unchecked by her watchful eye. And for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a place where people actually lived, not a prison of rules and fines. One Saturday morning, as I mended the fence along the east pasture, I heard it. Her voice, sharp and shrill, echoing down the street. "You're all complicit," she screamed. "Every single one of you, you let him ruin everything. This neighborhood was perfect until he came back." I wiped the sweat from my brow, leaning against the post, and watched as she stood in the middle of the cul-de-sac, arms flailing, her words bouncing off quiet houses. Curtains parted, faces peeked out, but no one answered her. Not one. Her rage fed on silence, but this silence was different. Not fear anymore, just indifference. The HOA board met that evening. I didn't attend, but I heard later what happened. Karen stormed in with a folder thick with complaints, demanding reinstatement, threatening lawsuits, shouting about conspiracies. She slapped papers onto the table, her voice hoarse from weeks of screaming. And the board, calm, collected, unflinching, told her no. Flat, simple no. When she wouldn't stop, security escorted her out. The neighbors who had once flinched at her clipboard now watched with steady eyes as she was led from the hall. Some shook their heads. Others didn't bother at all. That night, her porch light stayed off for the first time in years. Days later, a moving truck pulled up. I stood at the fence line as men carried boxes from her house, their footsteps heavy on the porch she had once ruled like a throne. Furniture, clothes, framed photos stacked in cardboard. Her life packed into containers that didn't care about titles or bylaws. Karen herself appeared last. She wore no red suit this time. Just a plain sweater, her hair pulled back, her face drawn and hollow. She climbed into the passenger seat of a beat-up sedan, her eyes fixed on the windshield, never once turning toward the neighborhood she had controlled for so long. The truck pulled away, the sedan followed. And just like that, she was gone. No farewell, no apology, no final speech, only absence. The subdivision exhaled. Lawns grew greener, porches filled with laughter, kids played until dusk without fear of fines. At the next meeting, the board discussed community gardens instead of penalties, barbecues instead of lawsuits. For the first time, neighbors lingered after the agenda ended, chatting in small groups, smiling freely. The land was quieter, too. The scars of that night still showed, blackened patches in the soil, burn marks on the barn's siding, but they would heal. Grass would grow back. Wood could be replaced. And as I walked the fence line at dusk, the crickets humming, the gate creaking softly behind me, I realized the land was more than healed. It was vindicated. Because it had outlasted her. All her threats, her fines, her shouting, they were gone. But the fields remained. The barn stood. The chickens still clucked in their coop, and the sun still sank over the hills, painting the sky in gold. That was the lesson my grandfather had tried to teach me all those years ago. Land endures. People come and go, their noise rising and falling, but the soil remembers. It carries dignity if you're willing to protect it. And as for Karen, I don't think about her much anymore. Not with anger, not even with pity. She's just another ghost the land has outlasted. Sometimes, when the wind rustles through the fields, I almost hear my grandfather's voice. Steady, calm, reminding me of the truth I'd nearly forgotten. Power doesn't come from control, it comes from respect. Respect for land, respect for neighbors, respect for yourself. And when you have that, no HOA, no Karen, no storm of lies can ever take it away. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.